Is democracy with a very modest growth rate sustainable for a country like India? For example, democracy in India growing at 3 and 3.5% between 1950 and 1994. Was this modest growth rate, which was often notoriously also referred to as Hindu growth rate, although it is a very falsified concept, was it sustainable for India? Because this was the time when poverty reached peaks, separatism reached peaks, threat to Indian sovereignty was at its peak, all kinds of problems. It means the country like India couldn't tolerate a growth rate of 3.5%. It needed the growth minimum like China, which started growing at double digits since 1979, 10% and above. The average Chinese growth between 1978 to 2010 has been 10%. What does this growth do? This growth allows the government to maintain a strong army, to suppress the internal rebellions, to homogenize the divergent population, to create stability, to overcome all internal security problems, and ab- abolish the poverty, create employment, create educational and health institutions, and improve the standards of life. This is what causes stability. So these numbers not are not the boring isolated things. They are the minimum requirement of managing a vast country like India with 100 crore population. The 4% growth will lead to disintegration of the country. The 4% growth would lead to disintegration of the country by creating Naxalism, Maoism, separatism, insurgency, terrorism. So growth is essential for sovereignty, unity, and integrity. And a procedural democracy which doesn't focus on substantive part of democracy, which require quick decision making, faster decision making, is going to compromise with growth. Therefore, democracy has to be managed the way China managed it. They made it democratic centralization. In India, if democratic centralization did not or couldn't work, then something was to be invented instead of trying to copy the European and American model of democracy, which they themselves did not follow in their own countries and in other countries where they brought wars. So the problem of India was to trying to copy the American or European model of democracy. That democracy caught us into the complexities of procedures, and we ritualized the procedures and completely ignored the outcomes. And the result was the very modest and compromised growth rate. And compromised growth resulting into weak corporate cultures. America and China both are dominated by the big size corporates which allow them to control the world. So China and America are in a position to control the world not because of their educated citizen but because of their powerful corporations. It is American and Chinese corporations which have built their empires or the bridges across the world which bring raw materials from our countries and they create markets for them. So in India, we had a very weak corporate culture. So did we succeed also in redistribution of wealth, making the poorer people middle class and converting middle class into vibrant entrepreneurs. That too didn't happen. Didn't happen. So, a managed democracy, the way we had a managed floating rate currency exchange, similarly, a managed democracy was needed instead of copying the Western or American democracy. Growth was substantive, uncompromisable. Procedures were compromisable. Procedures must have been compromised. The people talk about democracy as a mainly the leftist mindset intellectuals. They treat democracy itself as a boon. They think that democracy runs by itself. Democracy is a value in itself. But where are the resources? If procedures are followed, then is it sufficient? From where will come the resource to build and maintain army? From where will the resource come to build the large scale industries and a vibrant middle class? If these economic questions do not matter, then the democracy will also ultimately not matter. Democracies have fallen apart, they have collapsed if they focused only on procedures and values, and if they didn't substantiate values of democracy with economic and financial resources. So intellectuals, the poets and the romantics, they try to eulogize and romanticize democracy in a structure, in procedure, in values, but they don't know how to run it, which requires essential resource that is possible only when the GDP grows like what happened in China or in America, 10%, 10%. Then you have adequate financial resource. So imagining institutions romanticizing it's not going to survive in the longer run. This is the problem of India. Why India is struggling at $4 trillion and facing crisis of sovereignty, integrity, and unity, and caste wars and religious conflicts and constant external security threat, because these are not the concern for romantics. These are not the concerns for poets and writers, and these are not concern for idealist people, authors, etc. They think democracy means simply so probity, integrity, and holiness and sacredness of character. It doesn't matter how sacred or holy your people are, because they are not going to bring the resource. The holiness is not going to bring the resource. There were not holy people in 11th century and 12th century. Buddhist monks were holy or not, but they were killed and butchered by invaders or not. So question is holiness, sacredness of character enough to protect your sovereignty, integrity, and unity? Or does it require a strong resource, financial resource base to protect your sovereignty? There were no dearth of holiness of charactered people in, at least in Indian history. Rather, we had surplus of holy people, characteristic people, sacred people, highly moral and ethical people always dominated, but what was lacking was organizational skill, was military, was technology, was and behind them all was economy. So democracy doesn't run on vacuum; it runs on the fuel that is finance. So actual strength behind whether it is democracy or Chinese system or whichever the system is the money or the finance. Money or the finance. Be it monarchy, be it democracy, Successful democracies are developed countries. The poor countries are not successful democracy. Poverty and democracy cannot go hand in hand. So all this sermons or preaching by the romantics that we should focus on purity of character, etc., etc., that may be good, but not necessarily good for the sovereignty, unity, and integrity of the nation, which can be upheld only by strong finance that depends on GDP growth and a strong corporate culture. People talk about concentration of wealth in India's corporate. That's nothing in comparison to China. It's not even one tenth the kind of concentration of wealth that is to be found in China. In China, the corporates are mostly owned by state, but they are corporate. They have generated wealth. They only know how to generate the wealth. It a part of wealth, 30% goes to state, and then from state it trickles down. It percolates down. The same in case of China. The corporates are private. 30-40% goes to government, and the government uses it for people, infrastructure, defense, etc. It trickles down. It trickles down. State is a machinery of trickling down. But in India, we all botched up everything and just tried to emulate and imitate and copy the European model and American model, but we hardly succeeded in it. So, इसलिए when you talk about democracy, talk about growth and talk about corporates. If you don't have a strong corporates, you're bound to be disintegrated. You're bound to be disintegrated. Welfare and socialism and nothing is going to work. Welfare itself is not going to secure your integrity and sovereignty. So